Frank, good to see you.
All right. You guys ready to get into the breach?
Yeah,
We're ready,
listen,
brother.
we're ready, brother. Frank Moore is joining us here. Quick bio for those of you who are not familiar with Frank. He's retired FDNY, born and raised in the Bronx. Go Yankees. New York. Moore earned a bachelor's of science in business administration from Manhattan College. He worked in banking for nearly 6 years in Midtown. Left the business world to become a firefighter and never looked back. Eventually promoted to lieutenant. He was assigned to Division 6, covering the South Bronx and Harlem. He's written and spoken of his experiences on 9/11/2001 and his passion for God and country since retiring from the New York City Fire Department. He's done graduate level work in religious studies at St. Joseph Seminary in Yonkers and is a fellow of the Acton Institute in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Frank Moore, welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe, brother.
Yeah, baby. Man, that bio sounds good.
Well, it's yours, bro. It's yours. Joe Resinello, where do you want to go? Because we're talking about New York City. We're talking about crime. I just have to take a step back and take a little sip of my drink before we get to the conversation.
Frank, overall, the crime index in NYC increased in July 2022 by 30.5% compared to July 2021. Break it down for us. Why? I'm sure you got a lot of buddies who were cops, retired NYPD, firemen who are still on the job. What's going on?
Well, we're talking about good and evil, right? When we're talking about crime. And it's pretty obvious that if you are not going to prosecute a crime, then there's nothing to lose. So this is where we are. This is kind of common sense. And I think we're living in a time where common sense is missing.
There's no question. It seems that we always say that common sense isn't common anymore. You're 100% correct.
But Frank, let me ask you this, okay? Frank Moore joining us here. The people, what makes the people of New York? Now, again, Joe and I are Jersey guys, okay? But we both have been in the city for decades of our lives working, okay? We're very familiar with New York City. Doesn't crime affect you no matter who you are? When you got a guy, I say we because I consider myself partly New York because of having worked there. We had de Blasio. People voted for him. People voted for Eric Adams. Don't people see through their nonsense? Don't people want to be protected by the cops? What person in their right mind would vote for a guy to become mayor of New York City if they're not going to fight tooth and nail against crime? Talk about that, Frank, because to me, I'm baffled, brother.
Well, when I grew up in the Bronx, in South Bronx, about 7 blocks north of Yankee Stadium, in the 70s, when there was a lot of crime. And they keep going back to that era. But there's a difference between what we're seeing today and what we saw back then. Me being in the middle of it, the one difference is that you had respect for law enforcement. As a matter of fact, I remember in the newspapers, the NYPD took out an ad and said, just remember, we're the biggest gang in New York City. And so, they took care of business. The criminal element knew that they were there. And the difference is also that the criminal element in New York, they were New Yorkers. I don't know if that makes sense, but, you go back to the 70s and people came from New York, criminal or, honest people. Today, you've got MS-13 gangs, you got South American gangs, you got people that are coming from all over the place. And they know that this is just a rich haven for them to just walk willy-nilly over everything.
Well, Frank, listen, I'm going to hand it over to Joe, but I was working during the summer of 2020. I was working in the city in Midtown. Not for nothing. I'm not a scared guy. I don't walk down the street, constantly like nervous about everything. I'm looking over my shoulder, man. And I didn't do that for a number of years. And yes, I didn't do it when Giuliani was mayor. And even to his defense, not towards the end of his mayoralty, Mike Bloomberg too, who correct me if I'm wrong, Frank. He pretty much enforced the law. Nowadays, before I left and came to Arizona, all right, which I did a few months ago, working in New York City, brother, I'm looking over my shoulder, and I mean more so than just a normal looking over your shoulder. Because guess what? Actually, you know what? Joe wanted to ask about Alvin Bragg, so I'm going to segue from what I just said over to Joe, and you can maybe address this.
I've heard a lot of things about Alvin Bragg, particularly when there was that shooting where that young police officer was killed. There was a lot of coverage. At St. Patrick's, his wife, she was like 22 years old. She spoke. She made some very critical comments about the DA. For those who don't know, Alvin Bragg is the DA, Manhattan's DA. Clearly, he's saying to his people not to bother to prosecute basically small crime, petty crime, fare beating, people who are trying to jump the subways, resisting arrest, other nonviolent crimes. To be honest, it doesn't seem like his strategy's working. I remember when that gentleman's widow spoke at St. Patrick's, she was very critical of him. It was a very emotional speech. What are your thoughts on the DA? I'll be truthful with you. It doesn't seem like he's doing too good of a job, and I don't think he has the police support.
Well, I mean, once again, we get back to common sense. And the first thing I would say is that resisting arrest actually is a violent crime. So anytime that stop resisting arrest, all right, if you want to stop pointing a finger at police, then let them do their job, all right, and you can hash it out later on. That is not something that ever existed. I have police in my family. I was just talking to a friend of mine. He just recently retired, and third generation. So he had his grandfather's badge that he turned in, and he was almost in tears. What he was telling me was that this is the first generation. He told his son, who was interested in becoming an NYPD officer, that no, I don't want you to do that. So this is the first time. For a police officer to do that after 3 generations is telling you something about the lack of respect. And without policing, you don't have justice. And since we are talking about our faith, I pulled out of Isaiah. Isaiah in chapter 42 is also repeated by Matthew in the gospel. Just says, "Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one. He shall bring forth justice to the nations." Christianity is about justice. A nation without justice is evil. It's immoral. You're not actually promoting morality. You're promoting immorality, and you're encouraging it. So Alvin Bragg, to me, he's just not doing his job. Whatever he's doing, he's encouraging this behavior, and I can't for the life of me know why he hasn't been called out on the carpet for it, because except for the fact that this is all a corrupt institution that's going on in New York City, because it does not make sense. It's not common sense. And you're talking about subway crime. I think that subway crime was that's up 70, some ridiculous number. Mm-hmm. And if you live in New York, and you guys know, because you're both guys from down here, if you can't use the subways, you can't use New York. I mean, the 5 boroughs, you're not driving a car around. You have to get on a train. You have to get on a bus. So, I mean, this is just madness.
Well, Frank, let me ask you this. Frank Moore joining us at the front line with Joe and Joe on the Crusade Channel. You mentioned the Bronx and the police department in the 1970s. It's funny you mentioned that. A couple of weeks ago, I just watched Serpico for about the 50th time, okay? Sidney Lumet picture. And I bring that up for a reason. All Sidney Lumet pictures, it seemed, centered around corruption amongst the cops, okay? And that's correct, because a guy like you who knows so many cops and knows that, yeah, there's corruption in every, you mentioned being Catholic. We know there's corruption in every institution made up of human beings, okay? There's always going to be a certain level of that. This is not some cops getting paid off in the Bronx or in Brooklyn or something like. This is the wholesale destruction of the NYPD. And it leads one to have to ask themselves, is this by design? You have DAs across the country that say they're not going to prosecute certain crimes. Okay, New York City, maybe it starts with fare beating and all that stuff, resisting arrest. Okay, we know from history, recent history under Giuliani, no, those are the crimes you got to prosecute, because those guys, guess what? They actually are the real criminals. They got rap sheets as long as your arm, and crime went down. But it seems to me this is a deliberate attempt to destroy what you talked about just now, Frank. The implementing justice, in this case in New York City, okay, because that's what the cops do. I think you could call me a conspiracy theorist all you want. I think that this is by design, by the Soros types, to undermine the authority of the police, the legitimate authority of the legitimate police force. Frank, we have a few minutes. Go ahead. I want you to go off on that.
I'm smiling because you just took the words out of my mouth. I was just thinking about Soros and mentioning him, and then you just said it. I mean, And it's not just Soros, folks. The Soros has funded a lot of these attorney generals they're scattered all over the country, working mayhem. But he's been very clear, and I invite your audience to just look up his speeches, and you'll see that he's really about undermining democracy. And this is not an accident. He's doing it all over the globe. But New York City, since that's what we're talking about, New York City with Alvin Bragg and the mayor, because the mayor, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Right after he was elected, he's on a subway train, and he's got people around him, and he's watching a mugging from the platform, and he's as nervous as all get-go. This is, and he's the mayor, but you don't see a whole lot of talking about it, right? They'll bury that as soon as it happens. So, how do you add on to that, except that we need to remove Alvin Bragg. We need to start over again. We need to start fresh, because the people are what make New York City, and they can't exist in this kind of an environment. This is bizarre. The New York City Police Department is demoralized. These people are retiring left and right, and I haven't seen this since 9/11, where there was a mass exodus. And when you do that, you have this vacuum, and you don't have the experience. You don't have the people to teach the new guys coming on. And I almost feel like that's part of the plan. The idea is that we're going to have an inept, stumbling police force that people are going to continue to degrade.
Frank, I'm going to hand it over to Joe for one final question, but I'm going to put together a conversation for you to come back on and join us on social media. We're going to talk about the underlying, I hate to even call them philosophical, because that gives it almost kind of a heft that we don't want to give it. But the underlying ideas behind what's going on, and I think we could really have a good time unpacking that. But we don't have enough time, because that's a longer conversation. I'm going to hand it over to Joe for one final question.
Well, Frank and Joe, Joe knows this, Frank. I take the bus into Port Authority to go to work, and last week I was coming down the escalator. The Port Authority Police Department were giving coffee out. So I walked over there, and that's exactly what I said. So I walked over. I was like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, oh, we don't have any coffee left. I'm like, I told the guy, I was like, he's a cop. I'm like, I don't want your coffee. I want you. I want you here to protect us. That's why you're here. And it was almost like they're placating the people. Like, it's almost like, here's some coffee. Like, I don't want your coffee. I want you to stand there and protect us. That's what it's all about. And that happened last week. I didn't tell Joe Pasola that. That is the God's honest truth. I was coming down the escalator. They had a big table out.
If you told me that on the air, I would have laughed for 5 minutes. It took up air time.
Joe, that's God. That's true.
Shaking my head the rest of the time.
That's true. That happened last week. This is
I
where
hope he brought coffee into the police precinct.
Hey, Frank. I know we said last question, but I got along the lines of what Joe's saying. I gotta give you paint the picture for you. Just get a comment quickly from you. I always said to Joe on the show, okay, they want to be inclusive and all this, and then listen. You ask an average ethnic police officer, jacked guy. I don't care if he's black. I don't care if he's Puerto Rican, Italian, Irish. Okay, he'll say the same thing we are. Look, man, I'm sorry. This is going to get us in trouble. I don't want the 4'11", 200-pound chick. She's not the cop I want, and that's nothing against that. But being a cop means something. And I'm going somewhere with this. You remember the scene in The Godfather where Michael Corleone's in front of the hospital, right? And Sterling Hayden plays McCluskey, and he gets out of the car and he punches Michael Corleone in the face. I got in trouble with a lot of Italian Americans over this. But here's the bottom line, Frank. When I'm in trouble, I want a guy like McCluskey who's going to come and defend me. And I know how much I think you know where I'm going with this.
Mm-hmm.
I fear that guy. In
I don't want coffee.
Way. I don't want coffee from him. No. I don't want to get punched in the face from him either.
I know where to get coffee.
That's right.
But Frank, I was joking a little bit. I'd love for you to comment on that. I want cops, and like I said, we're ethnic guys. Okay, we're from the area, from the Northeast. Okay, I don't care. Like the left always tries to couch this in racism and all that, but that's a lot of BS. Give me some jacked black guy, Puerto Rican. I don't care who he is, from the Bronx. Okay, if he's wearing blue, Okay. I respect him and he's going to protect me. Okay. And it seems like that's one of the things that guys like Alvin Bragg and Eric Adams, who was a cop, that seems like they want to get rid of. I'm going to give you the final word, Frank.
Well, we know some things about Alvin Bragg, and we know a lot of things about Eric Adams and his time on the force. But you're talking about bare knuckles fighters, and if I'm in a barroom brawl and there's a bare knuckles fighter there that means business and he's against me, yeah, I don't like that. But if I'm in trouble and he's there and he's for me, I'm damn glad that he's there. So that's the kind of cop that you want. You want somebody that's willing to get dirty, get his hands dirty. He's gonna be in the mix and he's gonna defend. He has a code of law. He's not running willy nilly. And when he does that, he gets in trouble. So we want a guy to do his job, and we are finding that these guys are afraid to do their job. I had a friend of mine I played softball with, and he was out for the summer because he hurt his shoulder. I asked him, I said, where were you? And he said, I injured myself and on the job. He was making an arrest in one of the buildings in Manhattan. And he turned around, the guy wrestled him through a plate glass window and tore up his shoulder. And he said he was trying to take the guy's gun to shoot him. And I said, well, why didn't you shoot him? If this guy's trying to shoot you with your own, he goes, are you kidding me? If I shoot that guy, then, who knows what's going to happen. That's the way they're thinking now. And I don't know how you can even do that job. I mean, I'm looking at my friend's son. I would be telling him, hey, you know what? You go become an accountant or something, because that job is not respected. And until they respect it, and I think that people are starting to respect it now, but they're respecting it the hard way, by things not getting done and by themselves being put in danger because there is no policing.
Yeah.
I mean,
Frank,
we had
listen.
images. Yeah, go ahead.
No, please. You had images. Go ahead.
Images in 2020 of cops in Harlem being surrounded and having water dumped on their head. I mean, this is the total indignation, they just no respect. And that goes one step further. That they were lucky that that's all that was in there. Because we've seen episodes where that liquid is not water. So
Right.
if these guys are that vulnerable, then you're just waiting for a horror story.
No, Frank, listen, I'm just going to leave you with this. And like I said, Frank, we'll have you back. We're going to talk about policing with you and in general and some of the underlying philosophical concepts that the other side is trying to push. But I lived in Brooklyn when I got married. I lived in Brooklyn for 3 years, from 2013 to 2016. I worked there for like I said, for decades. I was there when those two cops got shot, and the cops turned their back on de Blasio. Okay, let me tell you something. If these police officers en masse turned their back on Alvin Bragg and Eric Adams, okay. Now, again, this will be a conversation for another day, and let them know. Stop pushing us around, and we are not going to do anything. And then you're the mayor of the Wild Wild West, and see how long you last. Okay? And yeah, I got a union. You're still going to pay me. How's that?
They're close. They're close
Well,
to that.
listen, Frank, God bless them, and let's see them do that, and things turn around for the people of New York and for the cops that protect them. Frank Moore, unfortunately, we're on a time limit, so we have to leave it there. Brother, you are always welcome on this show. We're going to have you back.
Right.
We're going to put together a larger conversation about law enforcement and what the enemy is up to. But as always, we love you. God bless you, and thank you so much.
Amen to that. I love you guys too, man. Great show.
Talk about your book, Frank. What's the book you got out?
Oh, yeah.
there?
What's the book? Go ahead, Frank.
America the Exceptional, Restoring a Wayward Nation's Greatness. It's on Amazon. And yeah.
All right, good. And then we encourage all of our audience members to go out there. I have it right here on my shelf. All right. And the bottom line is you need to read it. Frank Moore is a great, Frank, I say this, with humility. You're a great Catholic. You're a great inspiration for Joe and I. And you're a great American. I don't want to borrow a line from Sean Hannity, but I actually mean it. Okay. Because we mean it in a little bit of a different way. But you're our brother. We love you. And thank you so much for coming on. We'll talk to you soon.